I was also asked to speak on the topic of the Sustainable Development Goals, but I think it's really about constitutional governance and empowering women. But let me just start off with the Sustainable Development Goal 5, which says achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. And it's very broadly worded. There are the various objectives and targets. Sri Lanka has bought into this. Sri Lanka does have certain obligations to fulfill this. But let me talk about women in governance, not only at the national level, but at all levels. Right, so target 5.5 of the goal is ensure women's full and effective participation and equal opportunities for leadership at all levels of decision making in political, economic, and public life. And one of the indicators for this target is the percentage of seats held by women and minorities in national parliaments and subnational elected office according to their respective share of the population. And our share of the population is 51%, right? So I would also say, in addition to this, not only elected office, but I think we should look at appointed positions as well, like statutory boards, committees, commissions, and even look at the private sector. And it is also important to have women in decision making at community level, including right down to the grassroots at village level. So let me just throw out a few points on these issues. Why is it important to have women in decision making, including in parliament? Well, to begin with, obviously, it is a human right. It is the right of every person, women, minorities, everybody, to be able to take decisions and to share in decision making on anything that affects our lives, and not to have decisions made for us by somebody else and not have any say in the matter. So women we obviously have a right to take decisions on everything that impacts on our lives. We also have the right to take on an equal role in governance, whether at national or any other level. Women make up more than half the world's population, 51% of Sri Lanka's population. And if you are not permitted to take these issues, obviously you are going to be subject to discrimination and negative impacts, which women in this country are. If you look at land rights, family rights, sexual violence, because women do not have sufficient say in the matter, laws are passed by a male-dominated parliament. This has detrimental impacts of women. So men have dominated both private and public life, and women have been excluded. But there are also other advantages of having women in decision-making at all levels. And over the years, studies have been done on this. So for example, studies have been done on women in parliament, and it has been found that male legislators and female legislators usually have different priorities. And evidence has shown that parliaments which have a greater number of women show an increase in policies and in laws that emphasize the quality of life, health, education, minority issues, families, and overall this benefits the country. One study showed that when there are more female members in cabinets, more female cabinet ministers, there is an increase in public spending on issues like health and education. And this has been shown across the board in many countries. So women tend to focus on socio-economic rights much more than men do. Now, even if you take the private sector, in many countries, they are also pushing and passing laws to ensure that there are more women on corporate boards. In Norway, there is a law which says that women have to be at least 40% of a corporate board. In 2018, California passed a law that said every publicly traded company should have at least one female director, or they are fined $100,000. But I think that's been challenged, but the law has been passed. Germany has passed a law saying that companies should have at least 30% of women on their boards. And in the case of corporations also, the advantages of having women have been documented, because studies have shown that companies with female directors deal more effectively with risk. They address the concerns of customers, employees, shareholders, the local communities better than men do. And they tend to focus on the long-term priorities of the company rather than short-term profits. So there's a kind of balance when women are also put into these positions. And women directors are more in tune, obviously, with women's needs than men are. And that also helps to develop more successful products and services. So this has been accepted now across the world. The world is very, very slowly moving that way. Sri Lanka, unfortunately, is lagging behind. Now, the question is what is this number of women that should be on boards, parliaments, cabinets, whatever? Well, generally, you come back to what they call the 30% rule. I don't know why 30%, because if you really want equality, it should be 50%, or maybe more than 50% if you look at it. If you take proportional representation of men and women, women should be more, because population-wise, we are more. But 30% has been accepted as the minimum, the critical mass that is necessary if women are to have an impact. But unfortunately, even in our local government law, we only reached 25%. Right? So we have not reached this 30% at any point. So what is the status of women in decision-making in Sri Lanka? Well, at Parliament, it is really bad. We are at the bottom of all the world rankings. Now we have 12 female members, one less than the last time. We are generally around 5%. Globally, women in Parliament is 23%. In Africa, it's 23%. Even the Arab states have 17%. Right? So we are way below. In the South Asian countries, Nepal has 29.6, Afghanistan has 27, Pakistan has 20.6, Bangladesh has 20, Sri Lanka is about 5 point something. So we are right at the bottom, even of South Asia. Maldives is slightly ahead of us. Now, as you all know, the last meaningful attempt at constitutional reform, I'm not talking about the 20th Amendment, was in the 2016 to 17 period. But unfortunately, it failed. For the third time, a proposed constitution failed. During that process, which was a little different from the other processes, but because as you remember, Parliament turned itself into a constitutional assembly. There were 6 subcommittees made up of parliamentarians. There was a very open and participatory process of consultations. People were permitted to come before these committees. There were discussions, people wrote in, NGOs came, all kinds of interest groups came. And the issue of women was also discussed in many of these committees. So this issue was taken up. Now, I would also like to point out that not only do we have a low rate of women in Parliament itself, if you take the independent commissions, now I'm looking at the 2016 figures that were presented at the time. So you have the Elections Commission, three members, no women. Public Service, 9 members, 2 women. Police Commission, 7 members, 1 woman. Human Rights has the most, 2 out of 5. Bribery Commission, nothing, no women. Finance Commission, no women. Procurement Commission, 1 out of 5. Audit Service, no women. Delimitation, there was 1 woman. Total out of 46 members, 7 women, 15.2. If you notice, Finance Commission, Audit Service Commission, no women. So women are not put anywhere regarding finances. Bribery Commission also no women, elections also no women. The highest number was human rights. 2 out of 5 is 40%. So they probably think women are good for human rights, but not for finances. Right? So even here we have a very, very low percentage. Right? And in other statutory bodies, right? Statutory bodies means any committee or forum set up by law. If you take the University Grants Commission or university councils, now there are 2 women on the University Grants Commission, but at that time there weren't. University councils have very few women, all outnumbered by men. Things like the Law Commission, all male dominated, you might get 1 or 2 women. So that kind of appointed body also, so we are not only talking about elected, even appointed, there are insufficient women. So anyway, there are some positives here. And I was part of the process in 2016, and I have to say, I was very pleasantly surprised that a lot of parliamentarians were actually quite open, and they accepted that this has to improve, right? So it was discussed in several of the committees. It was taken up in the Committee on Public Service, where we raised the issue of women on committees, statutory bodies, and so on. Then in the steering committee, which was chaired by the Prime Minister, also it was taken up, women in Parliament. And we put forward some proposals. So one of the proposals was that at that time there was a discussion to have a mixed electoral system, first past the post combined with the proportional representation. So for the first past the post candidates, there was a proposal that women should be at least 1/3 of the nominees, right? So you nominate them, and then the women can campaign and fight it out, but they have to be nominated. Because the excuse of men is we don't want women to be nominated because they lose and our party will lose a seat, right? So we proposed, no, you can't say that. 30% of nominations on the FPP, the first past the post, should be women. Then on the appointed list, the nominated list, we suggested that what you call the zebra list, like you go man, woman, or woman, man, and the list should be closed because as we know, the parties put forward their list, but they never stick to it, right? So somebody else gets in, although the list says something else, right? We said the list should be finalized. You can't touch it once it is finalized, and you should have this alternate thing. And we said the Elections Commission also has a role in promoting gender equality at the lower levels of governance, provincial level, local government level, and part of their functions is to make sure that there is gender equality. The other thing was this whole issue of quotas. Now, to some people, this word quota is not a good word. And I think in the morning somebody said, ping mantri varu. Right, so you have coming through the back door. Like quota eka pidata deela wage. So we said, okay, don't use the word quota. Somebody suggested and we took this up. Say more, it's a gender balance. So you have a gender balance of 30-70. So either men or women can't be more than 70 or less than 30. So maybe in 100 years, if women dominate, even women can't go more than 70. Right? So you can go 40-60, but you can't go 20-80. So without saying, and also another thing about quotas is, if you go up to 30, then they'll say that's enough. Because the quota only says 30, so you can't go beyond that, even if there are women who can go beyond that. So that was also, that's in a way, a different way of putting it. And those were also accepted. So in the there was a proposal to have a second chamber of parliament. So in the second chamber, the constitutional councils, all the commissions, statutory bodies, any committees, councils, this should operate in all those forums. And as I said, I was quite pleasantly surprised to see that there wasn't major opposition to this. There was a lot of acceptance, right? So in several subcommittee reports, this issue was taken up. In the Fundamental Rights Subcommittee, there was a provision that said, women and men shall have equal rights and duties in all areas of public, family, political, economic, social, and cultural life. So that was put in as a right. Then the Subcommittee on Law and Order said there should be female representation in the Police Commission, National Commission and Provincial Commission. They were suggesting provincial commissions also. A Subcommittee on Public Service said minimum 1/3 of appointments should be reserved for women. There should be fair and adequate representation of gender, but there was acceptance that, you know, the idea was accepted. Nobody really said no or had serious objections to it, right? So that was very encouraging. But as we all know, that whole process just ended. So that was the third failed attempt at least some form of consultative constitutional change, right? So we are just left with the reports, which were never even debated, right? Okay, so now we are coming to the 20th Amendment, and thankfully, as Justice Tilakavardhana said, it's hopefully there will be second thoughts about it. But as Rohan was talking at the previous session, there are some very unsatisfactory points there, and to me also, the most disturbing one is the diminished role of Parliament. So the question is, on the one hand, we are fighting to get more women into Parliament, but if Parliament is going to become irrelevant, then what is the point, right? However many women you have in Parliament. Then the immunity of the president is also disturbing, because then that limits your ability to file fundamental rights cases, right, against anything discriminatory, and the justiciability of women's rights and everybody else's rights will be weakened, right? The independent commissions are also not going to be as independent as they should be. So here again, whether women and the appointments to commissions is no longer going to be as independent in the current, version anyway. So there again, the spaces for women to come in could be limited. And even when they do come in, will they be able to meaningfully function to make a difference if the commissions are politicized and don't have freedom to do what they have to do? The public service also, we all know that weak public service, which is corrupt, impacts on women. Women are unable to access necessary services. Opportunities for sexual bribery go up. Women are victimized with a corrupt public service. So we need a strong, independent public service free of corruption. And the Constitution has to give the framework for that. And similarly with the judiciary. If you don't have a free, strong, independent, and courageous judiciary, there will be really no point in filing cases, right? A judiciary that has to be able to function. And if the judiciary is going to be appointed in the method that is set out, that will probably have a very detrimental impact. Another provision that is very disturbing, and I hope this is also addressed by the Attorney General, is the provision which says that any amendment to a bill in Parliament shall not deviate from the merits and principles of such bill. Now that's a very strange provision. On the one hand, that will limit the ability of the courts to declare that the bill is bad and unconstitutional. And even at parliamentary stage, the parliamentarians themselves will not be able to propose amendments. So if you get a bill which says the principle of the bill is, for example, that sexual violence should be mediated rather than, brought before court and punished. Now that will be the principle of the bill. So if you can't challenge that principle, then you can't really challenge the bill. So this is just an example concerning women, but of course that's a very frightening thing because any law we will not be able to effectively challenge with this provision here. So those are some of the points I just want to throw out for discussion. All the points that, all the issues in this amendment that have potentially, will potentially impact on women in governance, and also the fact that we are still at a very poor level compared to the rest of the world, and we do need to move forward. Thank you.